If you've ever woken up at 3 a.m. and felt watched. If you've ever heard footsteps in a hallway you swear was empty. If you've ever sensed something standing outside your door, waiting for you to open it, then what happened to me will feel sickeningly familiar. Because the night I followed those footsteps, I discovered a corridor inside my home that wasn't supposed to exist. And whatever lived inside it knew my name. I've never been the kind of person to believe in ghosts, demons, spirits, any of that. I grew up in a normal house, with normal parents, living a perfectly ordinary life. Nothing paranormal ever happened to me. Not a flicker of a light bulb, not a shadow without a source, not even a creaking floorboard in the night. Which is why, when everything started happening, I didn't recognize the warning signs. I ignored them, explained them away, and even laughed off the things that should have terrified me. If I had paid attention early on, maybe things wouldn't have gotten this far. Maybe that thing wouldn't still be here. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it really began. The night I woke up to footsteps in my hallway. It was 3:12 a.m., according to the clock on my nightstand. Not around 3. Not a little after. I remember the exact time because I stared at it for a full minute before realizing I was awake, fully awake, and the sound I was hearing wasn't a dream. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. Heel toe. Heel toe. Heel toe. Not skittering like a rodent. Not the settling noises of an old house. These sounded human. My first thought was that someone had broken in. My second thought, embarrassingly enough, was that I was about to piss myself because I had nothing to defend myself with except a cheap table lamp. But when I listened harder, something felt off. The pacing didn't make sense. Whoever it wasn't trying to be quiet. They weren't sneaking or rushing. They were strolling, walking up and down my hallway over and over like they had every right to be there. I sat frozen on my bed, gripping my blanket. The footsteps went from one end of the hallway to the other, and then back again and again. After maybe 2 minutes, something even stranger happened. The steps stopped. Completely. Not faded. Not paused. Just gone. The silence that followed was worse. I waited for what felt like an hour, but was probably 30 seconds. Then, heart pounding, I forced myself to get up and tiptoe toward my door. I put my ear to it. Silence. Finally, I cracked it open. The hallway was empty. It was also dark, which made sense. I never left lights on at night, but something was wrong about that darkness. Not the normal dimness of a house at night, but a deeper, thicker kind of black. A darkness that felt heavy, almost physical, like it was watching me back. I turned on the light. Nothing changed except that the shadows shrank away. I searched the whole house that night. Every room, every closet, even behind the shower curtain. Nothing. No signs of forced entry. No open windows. Eventually, I convinced myself it really had been the house shifting, that I'd imagined the footsteps, that it was lack of sleep, or stress, or literally anything other than what it sounded like. That was mistake number 1. Mistake number 2 was ignoring what happened the next night. 3:12 a.m. again. Footsteps again. But this time, there was something new. A whisper. It was faint, like someone breathing words through a crack in the wall. I couldn't make it out at first. It was too soft and fast. A murmur just below the edges of comprehension. I didn't open the door that night. I didn't even move. I just lay there, sweating, forcing myself to pretend I was asleep. In the morning, everything was normal again. No signs of anything. No footprints. No weird smells. No objects moved. I told myself I was losing my mind. Then came night 3. This time, the footsteps didn't wake me. The knocking did. 3 knocks on my bedroom door. Slow. Deliberate. Knock. 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 I froze, completely alert. My heart climbed into my throat. Someone was standing on the other side of the door. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The knocking didn't continue. Whoever, whatever, was there seemed content to wait. After nearly a minute, I finally forced out the words. Who's there? Silence. I stared at the door. I waited. I clenched my fists until my nails dug into my palms. Then, soft as a sigh, a voice whispered through the wood. You know me, I felt something cold spread through my spine, like ice water was being poured into my bones. I didn't know that voice. It didn't sound male or female. It didn't sound old or young. It sounded wrong. like someone trying to imitate a human voice, but not fully understanding how. I backed away from the door until I hit the far wall. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. When the sun finally came up, I packed a bag and went to my friend Daniel's house, telling him I was taking a break from home. I didn't tell him the real reason. How do you explain something like that without sounding insane? I stayed with him for 2 nights. No footsteps, no whispers, nothing. It was peaceful, relieving. So after 2 days, I convinced myself the problem was the house. Not something supernatural, just something mundane. Maybe the heater ducts expanding at night. Maybe a raccoon in the attic. Maybe I'd hallucinated the voice because I wasn't sleeping. All rational explanations. Mistake number 3. I went back home, and that's when everything escalated. The house felt wrong the moment I stepped inside. Not visually, not physically. The furniture was the same, the temperature was the same, the lighting was the same, but something in the atmosphere had changed. The air felt colder, heavier, as if someone had been in there while I was gone. I checked every room. Nothing. Still uneasy, I made dinner, watched some TV, and went to bed early. Then, at exactly 3:12 a.m., I woke up. Not to footsteps, not to knocking, not to whispers. This time, I woke up because of the light. My hallway light was on. I never left it on. I stared at the thin beam of yellowish light spilling under my bedroom door, and something inside me instinctively told me, don't open it. But curiosity or stupidity won. I slowly got out of bed, opened the door, and stepped into the hall. And that's when I saw it. A door. At the end of the hallway. A door that had never been there before. It was narrow, tall, and painted the exact same color as the wall, almost camouflaged. There was no doorknob. No hinges. It looked like it had always been there, even though I had 100 memories, proving it wasn't. I stood there, stunned, unable to breathe. I whispered to myself, what the hell? The moment the words left my mouth, the light flickered. Once. Twice. 3 times. Then the footsteps started again. But this time, they were coming from behind that new door. Slow. Steady. Heel toe. Heel toe. Heel toe. Closer. 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 Then they stopped. Right on the other side. And something pressed against the door from the inside. A bulge formed, as if a forehead was leaning against it. Then a handprint appeared, pushing the surface outward from behind the wall. Long fingers. Too long. The bulge slid down slowly, like a face dragging itself along the door. I stumbled backward in pure, instinctive fear. I didn't wait to see whatever was about to step out. I ran. I ran back to my room, slammed the door, locked it, shoved a chair under the knob, and didn't move for the rest of the night. The footsteps resumed around 4 a.m., pacing up and down the hallway like before. But now that new door was part of the rhythm. Step, 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 soft knock, step, step, soft knock, soft knock, soft knock, like it wanted me to come back. In the morning, the door was still there. That's when I called a contractor, someone to inspect the house, make sure I wasn't missing anything structural. The guy came over that afternoon. I tried to keep calm while he looked around. When he reached the end of the hallway, he stopped. Is that a closet? He asked. No, I said. It showed up. He turned to look at me. Come again. I didn't want to explain it, so I just said, it wasn't there before. Can you open it? He frowned. It doesn't have a handle. I know. He inspected the edges, knocked on the wall, ran a hand over the paint. Then he said something I didn't expect. This isn't a door. I stared at him. What do you mean? It's a facade. It doesn't open. There's no frame behind it. No separation. It's just part of the wall. That can't be right, I said. It wasn't here before. He shrugged. Someone must have remodeled before you moved in. I've lived here 7 years. He stopped smiling. I could tell he knew something was off too, because he didn't charge me. He packed up fast, muttered something about having another appointment, and practically rushed out. I didn't blame him. If I could have left the house right then, I would have. But I didn't. And that was mistake number 4. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in bed with all the lights on, watching YouTube videos on my phone to stay awake. Around 1 a.m., I heard a soft scraping sound in the hallway, like nails dragging across a wall. I muted my phone. The scraping continued for maybe 20 seconds, then stopped. Silence. Then a voice whispered through my door. Let me in. I jumped to my feet, heart pounding. The voice was clearer this time. Closer. It still had that unnatural tone, like someone stretching human vocal cords too far, but it said the words perfectly. Let me in. I backed away from the door until I hit the dresser. Then another whisper came. This one wasn't outside the door. It was inside the room. Turn around. I froze. The air behind me shifted, like someone was exhaling inches from my neck. I felt warmth, not cold like a ghost, but actual warm breath. I didn't turn around. I ran into the bathroom, slammed the door, and stayed there until sunrise. When I came back out, the house was silent again. But something had changed. The new door at the end of the hallway was slightly open. Not much, maybe an inch, but enough to reveal darkness inside. Darkness that felt alive. I didn't look inside. I didn't dare. Instead, I packed a suitcase, got in my car, and drove to a motel. I stayed there for 3 days. I was too scared to go home, but the motel didn't stop it. The second night, I woke up at, you guessed it, 3:12 a.m. The hallway light in the motel was on. My door, which I had locked, was open. And from somewhere down the hall, I heard it. Heel toe, heel toe, heel toe. It had followed me. I lasted only one more day at the motel before finally returning home, hoping the thing had gotten bored or lost interest, but deep down I knew better. I knew going back was exactly what it wanted. When I walked inside, the house was quiet. Still. Too still. I checked the hallway. The false door was now wide open. Inside wasn't a room or closet. It was a corridor. A narrow, dark hallway stretching impossibly far into the distance. Much longer than the dimensions of my home should allow. The floor was the same as mine. The walls were the same. But the lights were flickering dimly, like they were running on failing power. Something was standing at the far end. I couldn't see its face. I couldn't see its shape clearly. But it was tall, thin, wrong, and it was waiting. Then it spoke. You came back. My entire body locked in place. My jaw clenched. My heartbeat felt like it was shaking my ribs from the inside. The thing took a step forward, then another. It moved too smoothly, like its joints bent the wrong way. Come closer. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping. My hands shook so violently I could barely stand upright. The creature kept walking, each step echoing unnaturally long. Heel toe, heel toe, heel toe. I finally managed to break free of the paralysis and ran for the front door. I didn't look back, but I heard it behind me, faster now. Heel toe, eel toe, eel toe, eel toe, eel. I jumped into my car, slammed the door, and peeled out of the driveway. I didn't stop driving for miles. When I finally pulled over, shaking and gasping for breath, I called the police anonymously to report a break-in. I never gave my name, never went back to meet them. I didn't want witnesses. I didn't want explanations. I didn't want anything connecting me back to that house. I left it all behind. The furniture, the clothes, the photos, the memories. Everything. I moved to a new city, a new apartment, a new life. But it's not over. It followed me again. 2 nights ago, at exactly 3:12 a.m., I woke up to a familiar sound. A door creaking open. I turned my head toward the hallway. And there, at the end of it, was a door that had never been there before. A narrow, tall door, slightly open. And from inside that impossible darkness, something whispered my name. I found you. I haven't slept since. I don't think I'll ever sleep again. Because once it chooses you, once it knows your footsteps, your voice, your breathing, once it learns your name, it never stops looking. It never stops knocking. And it never, ever leaves. I should have ignored her. I should have kept walking, kept my head down, kept pretending she wasn't there standing under that flickering streetlight on the corner of Oak Ridge Avenue. I've replayed that moment thousands of times in my head, the exact second where everything in my life twisted into something unrecognizable. Because if I had taken just 5 more steps, crossed the street, or even looked away, none of this would have happened. But I didn't. I looked at her, and she looked back. I was walking home from my late shift, something I'd done nearly every night for 2 years. My route never changed. For blocks down, cross the empty intersection, pass under the old yellow streetlight that always flickered, and then cut through the small pathway behind the row of townhouses. Routine, boring, predictable. But that night felt off from the beginning. The air was colder than usual, the kind of biting cold that sinks into your bones no matter how tightly you wrap your jacket around you. The sky was moonless, clouded over, and the entire neighborhood felt drowned in darkness. When I reached the intersection, I noticed her immediately. A woman, standing completely still under the streetlight. Her back was to me, her long black hair hanging in uneven strands that reached her waist. She wore a pale dress, not white, but the sickly, faded color of old bed sheets. And she wasn't moving, not even slightly. For half a second, I thought she might be a mannequin someone dumped there as a prank, but as I got closer, as the flickering lights sputtered above her, I realized how horribly wrong that assumption was. She was breathing, slow, deep breaths like someone in a trance. Her head was tilted just a little too far to the side, as though her ear was turned toward the ground, listening to something I couldn't hear. I stopped walking about 15 feet away. My instincts, the ones we all pretend we don't have, immediately told me to turn around and go home another way. But I hesitated, staring at her, trying to figure out if she needed help. It wasn't uncommon for drunk people to wander the area. Maybe she was lost. Maybe she'd been attacked. Maybe she was sick. That was the rational part of my brain. The other part screamed at me to run. Then, without warning, she moved. Not naturally, not slowly. Her head snapped in my direction. Not turned, her neck didn't rotate gradually. It jerked like someone twisting a doll's head too fast. Her hair fell away from her face, and that's when I saw it. Her eyes were wide open, wider than human eyes should be. The whites were bloodshot, the pupils huge and dilated. Her skin looked wrong, pale, almost translucent, stretched too tightly over her skull. And her mouth was hanging open like she was silently screaming. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. For a long, agonizing moment, neither of us moved. Then she whispered, except her lips didn't move. Her jaw stayed slack. The whisper came from somewhere too deep inside her throat. "You're late." I stagger backward. The words didn't make sense, but the tone did. Accusing, disappointed, hungry. "Are you okay?" I heard myself say, voice trembling. She took one step forward. I took one step back. Her foot made no sound against the pavement. Then she took another step, and another. Her movements were jerky, unsteady, like her limbs weren't connected properly. But she was fast. Too fast. I felt panic explode inside me. No, stay back. Her head twitched violently, eyes never blinking. The flickering light overhead buzzed louder, casting her in stuttering slices of brightness and shadow. Her hair swung with each unnatural movement, but her face, God, her face, remained frozen in that silent scream. Then she spoke again, louder this time. "You heard me call you." My mouth went dry. "I didn't. Nobody called. Please, just stop." She didn't stop. She kept walking toward me, faster, more frantic, her limbs snapping at sharp angles as she moved. I stumbled backward so quickly I nearly fell. "Help!" I shouted into the empty street. "Hey, someone help." No windows lit up. No doors opened. The entire neighborhood was silent, dead, like the world had emptied itself out and left only the two of us behind. The woman suddenly broke into a sprint. Not a normal sprint. Her legs bent sideways as she ran, her arms flailing behind her like loose ropes, her head bobbing unnaturally with each step. She covered the distance between us in seconds. I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I couldn't. My heart slammed against my ribs, my breath tearing out of me in ragged bursts. I sprinted down the street, cutting toward the pathway behind the townhouses, praying she wasn't right behind me. The sound of her footsteps echoed unnaturally. Too loud, too fast, too close. Slap, 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 slap. They were getting closer. I swerved up the small hill, almost tripping, and shoved myself between the narrow gap between two houses, squeezing through and bursting into my backyard. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I dropped them twice before finally unlocking my back door. I threw myself inside, slammed the door, locked it, and pushed the kitchen table against it for good measure. I collapsed on the floor, gasping, shaking, try to understand what the hell had just happened. What was she? Was she human? Was she alive? Was she even real? My body refused to move for nearly 10 minutes. Then the knocking started. Soft at first. Barely there. Tap, tap, tap. I crawled up on my knees, my heart shattering in my chest. The knocks weren't coming from the front door. They were coming from the back. Right behind the table, I'd shoved against it. Right behind the table, I'd shoved against it. Tap, tap, tap. My phone was in my pocket. I grabbed it and dialed 911 with trembling fingers. The ringing felt like it lasted hours before a dispatcher picked up. 911, what's your emergency? There's a woman, I whispered. A woman outside my house. She chased me. She's trying to get in. I think she's dangerous. Is she armed? I don't know. I don't think she's human. Silence. Then, sir, are you inside a safe location? No. I mean, yes. I'm inside. But she's knocking on the door. Please just send someone. We have units on the way. The knocking grew louder. Harder. More frantic. Thud. 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 I shoved myself farther away from the door. Please hurry, I begged. Stay on the line with me, sir. But something changed. The knocking stopped. Complete silence. Then, a new sound. SCRR, KKK. SCRR, KKK. Scraping. Nails dragging across the door. Slow. Deliberate. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep myself from screaming. The dispatcher kept talking, but I wasn't listening anymore. The scraping moved. From the door. To the wall. Then along the wall. Moving toward the window. My kitchen window was covered only by a thin curtain. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to move. But my head turned on its own. The curtain shifted. A pale hand slid underneath it. Long fingers curled around the fabric, pulling it back just enough. And her face appeared in the window, right up against the glass. Her eyes were wider than before, bloodshot to the point of bursting. Her skin was stretched tightly across her skull, and her jaw was unhinged, gaping open in a silent scream, so wide I thought it would tear her face apart. I screamed. I dropped the phone. Her head jerked up and down quickly, like she was laughing without making a sound, and she pressed her forehead against the glass. A spiderweb crack formed instantly. Then another, and another. The glass began to buckle. No, 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 and no. I scrambled backward, scrambling across the floor like a terrified animal. The window gave, but she didn't crawl through. She melted through. Her body folded unnaturally, bending in ways bones shouldn't bend. Her arms slipped in first, then her head, then her torso. Her legs twisted sideways as she squeezed through the broken frame. I tripped over a chair and fell onto my back. She stood up taller than before. Much taller. Her spine stretched upward with sickening cracks, vertebra by vertebra, until she towered over me, her head nearly touching the ceiling. Her mouth hung open, trembling, vibrating, like she wanted to scream but couldn't. Then she fell completely silent. For several seconds, she didn't move. Neither did I. Then she leaned forward, inches from my face. Her voice ripped into the air like tearing metal. You didn't answer. I scrambled onto my feet and bolted toward the stairs. I heard her limbs crashing across the floor behind me in rapid, chaotic movements. Her nails gouged deep scratches into the hardwood as she chased me. I reached my bedroom, slammed the door, locked it, and shoved my dresser against it. Her footsteps stopped. I pressed my ear to the door. Silence. Then I heard it. Not footsteps, not knocking, but a whisper right behind the door. I found you. A moment later, police sirens wailed in the distance. The whisper stopped. I held my breath. Then came a sound I'll never forget. Snap, like a body collapsing, then dragging, down the stairs, across the floor, toward the back door. By the time the police arrived, she was gone. There was no trace of her. No footprints. No fingerprints. Not even blood on the broken window. They told me it was likely a drug addict experiencing a psychotic break. That wasn't what I saw. That wasn't what chased me. That wasn't what whispered my name from behind a locked door. For 3 days, I didn't sleep. For 3 days, I kept every light on in the house. On the 4th night, around 2:45 a.m., I finally drifted off. At 3:12 a.m., I woke up. My room was dark. My lamp, which I had left on, was off. My clock was off. My phone was dead. A power outage. Or something else. Then, from outside my bedroom window, tap, tap, tap. I didn't want to look. I knew what I would see, but my head turned anyway. And there she was, standing under the streetlight directly across from my house. Except she wasn't standing normally. Her neck was bent. Her limbs hung at impossible angles. And her jaw hung even lower now, nearly to her chest. The flickering streetlight buzzed and sputtered as she stared up at my window. Then she lifted a hand, slowly, and pointed at me. Her voice carried across the street. Low, rattling, broken. You're late. I haven't left my house since. I don't know how long she'll wait. I don't know if she'll ever come back inside. But every night, at 3:12 a.m., the streetlight flickers, and I hear her whisper from somewhere in the darkness. Answer me. I've learned something about fear, real fear, the kind that doesn't fade after you wake up or after the sun rises. It has a time. Mine is 2:19 a.m. I know that number like a scar, because that was the exact minute I opened my front door and let something into my life that should have never been able to cross a threshold. I wasn't expecting anyone. I wasn't awake for any good reason. I had been asleep on the couch, the TV still playing some documentary I barely remembered putting on. My head felt heavy, my neck stiff, and the room was dark except for the slow, flickering frames on the screen. When the knocking started, it didn't feel real. 3 sharp knocks, perfectly spaced, perfectly loud. Knock. 1 second. Knock. 1 second. Knock. I jolted upright. It took me a moment to register where I was. The room was cold, colder than it should have been, and the knocking kept replaying in my mind even after it stopped. I looked at the digital clock on the DVD player. 2:19 a.m. My first thought was that something was wrong. Nobody knocks at that hour unless it's an emergency. My second thought was that it was some idiot messing around. Teenagers occasionally ran around this neighborhood at night. But something about the knock felt too deliberate, too composed. I waited, expecting another knock, but nothing came. After about 30 seconds of listening to my own heartbeat, I forced myself off the couch. I walked slowly to the door, each step feeling heavier. For every step forward, there was another voice in my head screaming to turn around, to pretend I hadn't heard anything, to go back to sleep. But I didn't. I reached the door, wiped my palms on my sweatpants, and looked through the peephole. Nobody. The front porch was empty. I stared for a long moment, confused, annoyed, and more awake than I had been in hours. I twisted the lock, opened the door a crack, and stepped out onto the porch. Hello. No answer. The street was empty. Silent. Motionless. That's when I heard it. A faint shuffle. Not from the street. Not from the sidewalk. From the side of my porch. Slow footsteps, lightly brushing against the wooden boards. Someone was standing just out of sight. I froze, my heart climbing into my throat. Who's there? I said, my voice cracking. A few seconds passed. Then a reply. Soft. Fragile. Wrong. I'm Cole. The voice didn't belong to anyone I recognized. It didn't sound like an adult or a child. It sounded like someone trying to remember how to speak. I stepped back toward the doorway. I'm calling the police, I stammered. Silence. Then, don't shut the door. A pale hand curled around the corner of the porch column. Too thin, too long. The fingers were bony, the nails colorless. For a moment, I thought it was a trick of the light, but then another hand wrapped around the wood from the other side. I didn't think. I moved. I rushed back inside and swung the door shut. Before the latch even clicked, something slammed into the other side with enough force to rattle the hinges. I jumped backward, heart hammering. Then came the sound. Not banging, not kicking, breathing, right against the door. Wet, ragged breathing, like a starving animal sniffing through a crack in a cage. You opened it. I stumbled away, gripping my phone with shaking hands. I dialed 911, but it didn't ring. There was nothing. No tone. No operator. No connection. Just dead silence. Then a voice came through the phone, my phone, but not through the speaker. Through the earpiece. The same voice from outside my door. I dropped the phone. It clattered across the hardwood and slid under the coffee table. I don't remember grabbing the lamp, but suddenly it was in my shaking hands, raised like a makeshift weapon facing the front door. My pulse was so loud it drowned out nearly everything else, except the breathing. Slow, deep, inches from the wood. Then, the breathing stopped. The silence felt alive, like the air itself was waiting. I didn't dare approach the door. I didn't dare look through the peephole again. I backed into the living room, grabbing a chair and propping under the doorknob, even though I knew deep down that whatever stood outside wasn't worried about locks or chairs or anything human-made. Minutes passed, or maybe an hour. Time didn't feel real. Then, without warning, the doorbell rang. Ding-dong. I nearly screamed. The cheerful chime felt like mockery in the silent, freezing room. It rang again. Ding-dong. Again. Ding-dong. Then came the voice, louder this time, like it was speaking right through the door. You opened it for me. Why won't you open it again? I clamped my hands over my ears. Ding-dong. 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 Then silence. Then knocking. Then pounding. Then scratching. SCRR. 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 I couldn't take it anymore. I retreated into my bedroom, locked the door, and huddled on the floor behind my bed. My mind raced with every horror movie scene I'd ever seen, every urban legend, every nightmare. Except this wasn't a story. This wasn't fiction. This was real. Something was outside my door, and it wanted in. I don't remember falling asleep, but I must have passed out from exhaustion. When I opened my eyes again, sunlight spilled through the blinds, painting warm stripes across the carpet. It was morning. I almost cried from relief. I crept out of my bedroom and slowly approached the front of the house. My heart pounded as I reached the door. The chair was still braced beneath the knob, but everything else looked normal. Too normal. I removed the chair and pulled open the door. The porch was empty. The street was empty. Everything looked peaceful, except for one thing. A single, wet handprint on the glass window of the storm door. Long fingers. Too long. I shut the door. Locked it. Double-locked it. I told myself it had to be a dream, or sleep paralysis, or some kind of hallucination from being overtired. But the handprint was still there hours later. I scrubbed the glass 3 times before it fully faded. I tried to move on with my day. I tried to convince myself it was over. It wasn't. That night, I stayed awake until nearly 4 a.m., terrified that the knocking would return. It didn't. The next night passed uneventfully too. By the third night, I'd almost convinced myself it was a one-time nightmare. Then, at 2:19 a.m., my phone vibrated. A text message from an unknown number. You opened it. Open it again. I dropped the phone like it burned me. My hands trembled uncontrollably. I turned it off, set on the table, and backed away. 2 minutes later, it vibrated again, even though it was powered off. I didn't touch it. I didn't go near it. And that's when I heard it. A small sound. Near the front door. A tap. Just one. Then, please, it's cold. My blood froze. I crawled to the window on the far side of the living room and gently lifted a single corner of the curtain. Someone stood on my porch. A figure. Tall. Hunched. Pale. Their face was turned away from me, angled toward the door, as though listening to the wood itself. Their long fingers rested on the window pane, tapping lightly. Tap. 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 Then they turned their head toward me. Not their body, just their head. The movement was too fast, too unnatural, like a puppet jerked by a string. Their face. Their eyes were pitch black. No whites. No pupils. Just 2 voids. Their jaw hung slightly open, trembling. I dropped the curtain immediately. My chest felt tight, like someone was squeezing my lungs. I reached for the phone, but it vibrated again, and I snatched my hand away as if it would bite. Another text. Stop hiding. Open the door. Then another. I'm colder now. Then, I saw you. I couldn't breathe. I backed away from the table where the phone lay vibrating. The knocking began again. Not panicked. Not violent. Just 3 slow, patient knocks. Knock. 1 second. Knock. 1 second. Knock. I pressed my hands over my ears. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I didn't know how long the knocking lasted because everything blurred together. The fear, the cold, the terrible feeling that something was already inside with me. At some point, the knocking stopped, but I didn't feel safe. I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall until sunlight finally crept across the ceiling. When morning arrived, I checked the door. Nothing. The porch was empty again, but there was a new message on my phone. Timestamp, 2:19 a.m. Coming back tonight. I felt sick. That entire day, I couldn't focus. Couldn't eat. Could barely breathe without imagining that pale figure standing on my porch, waiting, knowing I'd eventually open the door again. By nightfall, I had armed myself with everything useless, kitchen knives, heavy objects, things that would do nothing against whatever that was. I shut every curtain, turned on every light, sat on the couch facing the door. At 2:10 a.m., my phone vibrated. I didn't pick it up. At 2:15 a.m., the air in the house grew colder. Not normal cold. The kind of cold you feel in nightmares where something icy grabs your ankles. At 2:18 a.m., I heard footsteps approaching the porch. Slow, deliberate, heavy. I gripped the lamp so tightly my knuckles turned white. At 2:19 a.m., silence. Not a single sound. Then, light tapping on the living room window. My stomach dropped. It wasn't at the front door this time. The tapping moved along the wall, window to window, room to room. Tap, shift, tap, shift, tap. Then it stopped. A shadow moved past the crack under the front door. Something was standing inches away from me. My phone vibrated on the table violently. I finally grabbed it. One new message. Behind you. I turned, slowly, terrified. The hallway behind me was dark, empty. I stared for 10 seconds. 20, 30. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. Then, something whispered from the darkness. Not in front of me. Not behind me. Right beside my ear. You opened it for me once. I screamed and threw myself forward, smashing into the coffee table and collapsing to the floor. My legs kicked out, trying to push myself backward. The whisper came again from somewhere above me. Open it again. Every light in the house flickered violently. Then, with a deep, echoing creak, something pushed on the front door from the outside. Slowly, patiently, the lock rattled. The deadbolt shook. I held my breath. The door stopped moving. Then, footsteps. Walking away. Down the porch steps. Across the yard. Gone. Not a sound remained. I stayed where I was until the sun rose, shaking, sweating, too afraid to even blink. When morning light finally filled the room, I crawled to the door and opened a crack. The yard was empty, except for one thing. On the middle of the porch sat a small piece of paper. I picked it up with trembling fingers. 6 words. You'll open it next time. I moved out 3 days later. I haven't slept well since. I avoid windows. I avoid porches. I avoid the sound of knocking. But sometimes when the night is cold and quiet, I still hear it. 3 soft, patient knocks. Knock, knock, knock. Always at 2:19 a.m. and always followed by the same whisper, somewhere just outside my door. You will open it again,